So I was going to continue showing cards from the Planar Portal Commander deck that have the Dungeons and Dragons set. So the next one after the last video was Throes of Chaos, which is a sorcery for 3 and a mound. Cascade. When you cast this spell, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card that costs less. You may cast it without paying its mana cost. Put the exiled cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. Retrace. You may cast this card from your graveyard by discarding a land card in addition to paying its other costs. Vandal Blast. It's a sorcery for a mound. Destroy target artifact you don't control. Overload, 4 and a mound. You may cast this spell for its overload cost. If you do, change its text by replacing all instants of target with each. So if you play it for the overload cost of 4 additional colorless mana, you would be destroying each artifact you don't control instead of destroying a target or a single artifact you don't control. So in a commander deck, that's potentially pretty entertaining. Bituminous Blast, probably really butchering the name of the card. It's an instant for 3, a swamp and a mountain. Cascade, when you cast this spell, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card that costs less. You may cast it without paying its mana cost. Put the exile cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. Bituminous Blast deals 4 damage to target creature. Rakdos Charm. It's an instant for a swamp and a mountain. Choose one. Exile all cards from target player's graveyard. Destroy target artifact, or each creature deals 1 damage to its controller. So some pretty interesting cards or choices depending on what decks you're going against. Me personally, if you're going against someone that puts stuff into your graveyard to bring it back, the first choice to exile all cards from target player's graveyard, you're then removing stuff that they could grab from their graveyards, but it all depends on the situation. Some of the other choices might be more of a priority in the situation. Terminate. It's an instant for a swamp and a mountain. Destroy target creature. It can't be regenerated. Arcanine Signet. It's an artifact for 2 colorless mana. Tap to add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. So, where it's a non-land card that allows you to tap for mana. It's helpful, especially in Commander where you're potentially trying to do multiple things on a turn. Commander's Spear. It's an artifact for 3 colorless. Kind of a same deal where you're tapping for mana. Tap to add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. Sacrifice Commander Spear, draw a card. Fellwar Stone. It's an artifact for 2 colorless. Tap to add 1 mana of any color a land an opponent controls could produce. So I guess it's good if you're trying to cast an opponent's card, but it's not in your commander's color identity, I guess. That's the only thing I could think of, maybe. Mind Stone. It's an artifact for 2 colorless. Tap to add 1 colorless, or pay 1 and tap. Sacrifice Mind Stone, draw a card. Orazca Relic. It's an artifact for 3 colorless. Ascend. If you control 10 or more permanents, you get City's Blessing for the rest of the game. Tap to add 1 colorless. Tap, sacrifice Orazca Relic. You gain 3 life and draw a card. Activate only if you have the City's Blessing. So that's sort of an interesting thing where, it does you can do a couple of different things, but one, you kind of have to wait until you have a certain amount of permanents. Radko's Signet. It's an artifact for 2 colorless. Pay 1 and tap to add a swamp and a mountain. Soul Ring. It's a artifact for 1 colorless that you tap to add 2 colorless. Like a couple of the other artifacts that tap for land, or not for land, tap for mana. It's kind of a staple of Commander. Soul Ring more so than some of the other ones, because a couple of the other ones I haven't heard of. I don't know if that's just because they're newer cards, or I just don't have as many Commander decks. Talisman of Indulgence. It's an artifact for 2 colorless. You can tap to add 1 colorless, or you can tap to add a swamp or mountain. Talisman of Indulgence deals 1 damage to you. So kind of interesting where you're getting a colorless, it doesn't do anything to you, but if you want one of those 2 colors, it's like, okay, we're dealing a damage to you, which normally isn't a big deal if you're starting with more than 20 life like you would in Commander, or if you have some way to gain life. Bojuka Bog. So that's quite an old land. I don't remember what set it was from, but I remember it from back in the day. So land, Bojuka Bog enters the battlefield tapped, and Bojuka Bog enters the battlefield. Exile all cards from target player's graveyard. Tap to add a swamp. So that's pretty cool. You send some stuff to opponent's graveyard, play that land, and exile their graveyard. Unstable Obelisk. It's an artifact for 3 colorless. You can tap to add a colorless mana, or you can pay 7, tap it, sacrifice Unstable Obelisk. Destroy target permanent. Commander Tower. So land, tap to add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. So that, like Soul Ring, other than the fact that it's a land instead of an artifact, this is the staple in most Commander decks. Mortuary Mire. It's a land. Mortuary Mire enters the battlefield tapped. When Mortuary Mire enters the battlefield, you may put target creature card from your graveyard on top of your library. Tap to add a swamp. Radko's Carnarium. It's a land. Radko's Coranium enters the battlefield tapped. When Renko's Coranium enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand. Tap to add a swamp and a mound. Bag of Devouring. It's an artifact for a swamp. Whenever you sacrifice another non-token artifact or creature, exile it. Pay 2 mana, tap, sacrifice another artifact or creature, draw a card. Pay 3 mana, tap, sacrifice Bag of Devouring, roll a d10, return up to X cards from among cards exiled with Bag of Devouring to their owner's hand, where X is the result. Dance Macabre, probably saying that wrong. It's a sorcery for 3 and 2 swamps. Each player sacrifices a non-token creature. Roll a d20 and adds a toughness of the creature you sacrifice this way. 1 through 14. Return a creature card put into a graveyard this way to the battlefield under your control. 15 plus. Return up to 2 creature cards put into graveyards this way to the battlefield under your control. Death Tyrant. It's a 4/6 Beholder skeleton for 4 in a swamp. Has Menace, negative energy cone. Whenever an attacking creature you control or a blocking creature an opponent controls dies, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Pay 5 in a swamp. Return Death Tyrant from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Grim Hireling. It's a 3/2 Tiefling Rogue for 3 in a swamp. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create 2 treasure tokens. Pay a swamp. Sacrifice X treasures. Target creature gets target creature gets -X until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. So unless you have some way to give sorceries flash, you would be playing that on your turn. Hellish Rebuke. It's an instant for 2 in a swamp. Until end of turn, permanents your opponent control gain. When this permanent deals damage to the player who casts Hellish Rebuke, sacrifice this permanent. You lose 2 life. Lorcan Warlock Collector. It's a 6/6 devil for 5 and 2 swamps. It is a legendary creature, but where it's only has swamps, that limits you to only creating a black deck around it. You couldn't use the black-red cards or the red cards from this deck. As I said, it's a 6/6. It has flying. Whenever a creature card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, you may pay life equal to its mana value. If you do, put it on the battlefield under your control. It's a warlock in addition to other types. If a warlock you control would die, exile it instead. So that's pretty cool. Like, you pay life to get a creature from your opponent's graveyard, and if that creature you put on the battlefield would die, you exile, so your opponent then can't use it, once it goes, because it wouldn't be going back to their graveyard, it would go to exile instead. Fiend Lash. It's an artifact equipment for 1 and a mountain. Equipped creature gets +2/+0 and has reach. Whenever a equipped creature is dealt damage, it deals damage equal to its power to target player or planeswalker. And its equip cost is 2 and a mountain. So, I mean, where it's an artifact equipment instead of an like enchanted creature, you're paying the 1 and a mountain to put it onto the battlefield, not attached to anything. And then 2 and a mountain anytime you have the mana and want to equip it to something to take it from the battlefield, on its own and equip it to a creature. Reckless Endeavor. It's a sorcery for 5 and 2 mountains. Roll 2 d12s and choose 1 result. Reckless Endeavor deals damage equal to the results to each creature. Then create a number of treasure tokens equal to the other result. Share the Spoils. It's an enchantment for 1 and a mountain. When Share the Spoils enters the battlefield or an opponent loses the game, exile the top card of each player's library. During each player's turn, that player may play a land or cast a spell from among cards exiled with Share the Spoils, and they may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast that spell. When they do, exile the top card of their library. So kind of an interesting way of, getting different stuff on the battlefield or casting different instants or sorceries by kind of exiling stuff, but also on your turn being able to play some of it that might have been from another player's deck. Wild Magic Sorcerer. It's a 4/3 Orc Shaman for 3 and mountain. The first spell you cast from exile each turn has Cascade. When you cast your first spell from exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card that costs less. You may cast it without paying its mana cost. Put the exile card on the bottom of your library in a random order. Fevered Suspicion. It's a sorcery for 6 and a swamp and a mountain. Each opponent exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card. You may cast any number of spells from among these non-land cards without paying their mana cost. Rebound. If you cast this spell from your hand, exile it as it resolves. At the beginning of your next upkeep, you may cast this card from exile without paying its mana cost. Hurl Through Hell. It's an instant for 2, a swamp and a mountain. Exile a target creature until the end of your next turn. You may cast that card, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast that spell. Shivering Witch. It's a 2/2 human warlock for 3 in a swamp. When Shivering Witch enters the battlefield, create a number of 1/1 black creature or black rat creature tokens equal to the number of opponents you have. Pay 1 in a swamp, sacrifice a creature. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. So, kind of cool, I guess. You get a couple of rat tokens. If you have a way to blink this guy in and out, you can, get a few more. You can sacrifice creatures if you need to give a target creature -2/-2, so potentially get some of those rat tokens to then sacrifice them and kill a small creature that way if you need to. Consuming Vapors. It's a sorcery for 3 in a swamp. Target players sacrifices a creature. You gain life equal to that creature's toughness. Rebound. If you cast a spell from your hand, exile it as it resolves. At the beginning of your next upkeep, you may cast this card from exile without paying its mana cost. Dead Man's Chest. It's a enchantment aura for 1 in a swamp. Enchant creature an opponent controls. When an enchanted creature dies, exile cards equipped to its power from the top of its owner's library. You may cast spells from among those cards for as long as they remain exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. Fleet of the Shadows. It's a 3/3 vampire wizard with flying. Whenever Fiend of the Shadows deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles a card from their hand. You may play that card for as long as it remains exiled. Sacrifice a human, regenerate Fiend of the Shadows. So, where I still have so much left, I'm gonna try to do the rest in another video. Hopefully you're enjoying everything you're seeing so far, and have a good day.